Ever feel like you're just hanging on for dear life when you're trying to learn something new? Well, that's kind of the vibe of this deep dive. We're going to be looking at this chapter. It's called Fall Down 7 Times. And let me tell you, it is about way more than just horseback riding. What we've got for you today are some excerpts from the chapter itself, and then we've got some really interesting discussion questions to go along with it to help us kind of unpack everything.
Yeah, I think what you'll find is that even though we only have this one chapter and we don't have the full story, it still says a lot about, resilience and cultural differences and those struggles that I think we can all relate to when we're trying to accomplish something worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really jumps right into the action from the get-go. We meet this character, his name is Manjiro, and somehow he's gotten himself talked into, are you ready for this? A horse race. Against, of course, Tom, who we learned has been riding horses practically since he was a baby.
Yeah, like what could possibly go wrong, right? And to make matters even worse, Manjiro's horse, Duffy, well, let's just say Ducky, sounds a lot more like a gentle giant than a, championship racehorse.
Right. Like you can already picture it. You've got this big, sweet farm horse lumbering along, and Manjiro's just desperately trying to hang on. It's such a classic underdog story.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling we are really going to enjoy seeing how this plays out, or reading how this plays out, I should say. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, there's this whole other layer to the story, too, that I thought was really interesting when I was reading through this.
Right, because there's always that unspoken motivator. And in this case, we have Catherine. And from the discussion questions, it really seems like there might be, a little romance kind of brewing there, which just adds this whole other level of complexity to this whole horse race.
Yeah, all of a sudden, it's not just about winning or losing, right? He's trying to prove himself.
Right.
And not only that, it sounds like the entire school is going to be there watching. Can you imagine? Talk about pressure.
Oh, absolutely. And it's really smart the way the author did that, because that's such a universal feeling. You want to impress somebody, but then there's that fear of failure. But at the same time, there's that thrill of possibility. Right.
Totally. And speaking of failure, let's just say Manjiro gets very, very familiar with the ground in this chapter.
Oh, he does. He falls off the horse a lot. Which brings us to the title of the chapter, of course, which is Fall Down 7 Times, Get Up 8. And this is a proverb that his mother taught him that he carries with him throughout the story.
Yeah. And this is where things start to get even more interesting, because when you read the discussion questions, they're suggesting that all these falls that he's taking, it's not just about him, learning how to ride a horse. They're trying to get us to think about it more like it's a symbol, right? For his larger journey as this Japanese boy who is navigating, it seems, American culture.
It's a powerful metaphor. If you think about it, every time he falls off the horse, it's almost like he's stumbling over these unwritten rules of this new culture that he's trying to fit into, And so those falls really kind of represent the challenges and the missteps and those awkward encounters that I think we can all relate to, when we're trying to, adapt to a new way of life.
That's such a good point. He is not just learning to ride a horse, he's learning to ride this whole new cultural landscape. So for anybody out there who has ever felt like a fish out of water, you can probably relate to what Manjiro's going through here. But the question is, how does he deal with all these, stumbles?
Well, that's where his resilience comes in. And this is something I think hopefully you'll be inspired by. Because remember that proverb, fall down 7 times, get up 8? Well, he really takes that to heart. It's not just, something he says. He lives it, He doesn't let those falls, make him give up or break his spirit. He keeps getting back on that horse.
And that takes guts, especially with this added pressure of knowing that Catherine might be watching him. I mean, he could very easily just give up, right? Like, who would blame him?
Right, exactly. It would be totally understandable if he was just like, yeah, you know what? I think I might have a sprained ankle or something, anything to get out of it and avoid that potential public humiliation. He doesn't do that. He chooses to face this challenge head on, even if it means falling flat on his face in front of everybody.
Now, that's dedication. But he's not, going through this alone, is he? What about his friends? They're not just, sitting on the sidelines, watching him eat dirt, are they?
Well, they're there, although maybe not in the way you would think. He's got his buddies, Terry and Job, who, they bring their own special brand of support, I guess you could say, to the table, although sometimes it feels a little more like frustration than support. But it's very clear that they care about him, but they also seem to have this very different approach to dealing with challenges, especially compared to Manjiro.
Oh, yeah. I think we all have those friends who are like, oh, you know what you need to do. Yeah. And they're full of advice and maybe a little impatient, but, they're ultimately rooting for you in their own way. How would you say their way of approaching a challenge is different from Manjiro's?
I think that's where you really see these cultural differences come out, because Terry and Jay, they're very much like, there's a problem, let's fix it, let's push through it. Whereas Manjiro, you can tell he understands that sometimes mastery takes time, right?
Right.
And he's really embracing the entire process, even the stumbles.
Which kind of makes you wonder, are Terry and Job really helping him?
Yeah.
Or are they actually, maybe their methods are clashing with his, maybe more patient, maybe even like a more culturally ingrained approach to it?
Yeah, and it speaks to how complex, cultural differences can be, even within like a close friendship, right? Because what one culture might see as like helpful encouragement, another one might perceive as pressure, you
Yeah.
know?
And it really makes you stop and think about those times when maybe we're trying to be there for a friend and help them out.
Yeah.
But, the way we're going about it, maybe it's not really landing the way we intended it to. And maybe sometimes the best way to be supportive is to just, acknowledge the struggle and offer encouragement. Even if we don't fully understand all the ins and outs of what they're going through, it's like, they say the road to success is paved with good intentions and probably a whole lot of bumps and bruises along the way. But what really strikes me about Manjiro is even though he's going through all this, he still manages to find a sense of humor about it all.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes this chapter so endearing. It's not like we're dealing with this, stoic character who's just, grimly facing adversity. At one point, he literally laughs after being thrown from the horse.
You got to admire that. I mean, if you can picture yourself, eating dirt again and again, and instead of getting frustrated, you just start laughing.
Hmm.
It just says so much about, you know, his resilience. But I also wonder, like, what's going through his head in those moments? Is he laughing at how ridiculous the whole situation is?
Mm.
Or is it more about, like, I'm not going to let this get to me?
Right. Is it almost like an inner pep talk? Like, okay, that one wasn't so great, but I'm getting closer. Or is it just pure instinct,
Yeah.
Like a way to just kind of deflect the embarrassment and keep his spirits up. It's funny how, like, a little detail like that can really make you think about, the different ways people deal with pressure and those kinds of setbacks.
And I'm sure having Catherine there, or at least the thought of her being there watching, probably adds a whole other level to that inner pressure
Hmm.
that he's feeling. Like, I'm sure he would have much rather, fall into a pile of hay than fall flat on his face in front of her.
Oh, 100%. I mean, we've all been there, right? And the discussion questions even touch on that, like how that fear of failure, especially in front of somebody you admire, really changes everything for Manjiro.
It's not just about learning this, physical skill anymore. It's about proving something to her, about, gaining her approval, which, I mean, talk about universal insecurities, right?
Yeah.
Especially at that age.
Exactly. But the fact that he doesn't let those insecurities stop him, he just keeps getting back on that horse, both literally and figuratively. I mean, that really says a lot about his character.
He's determined. He wants to succeed, even if it means falling down, I don't know, like a million times.
Yeah.
It's like that saying, our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall.
Yes. It's that attitude. That's what's going to make all the difference. It's not about avoiding failure. It's about how you come back from it. And that's something that applies to so much more than just horseback riding.
It's about, embracing the learning process, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. And it's about realizing that each time we fall short, each time we stumble, it's actually an opportunity to learn and grow.
Yeah.
And, it's a message I think we could all use a little more of these days, don't you think? No matter what we're going through, no matter how many times we fall down, it's that willingness to get back up, to keep trying, that really matters in the end.
100%. It really is. It's like instead of being so afraid of failing, what if we just accepted that it's part of the process?
It's so true. And that's what Manjiro's story really shows us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He's not like some superhero who never makes mistakes. He falls, he has his doubts, he probably feels a little embarrassed sometimes. I'm sure we've all been there. But he never lets it stop him. And maybe that's what makes his story so powerful, so relatable, because it reminds us that you don't have to be perfect to be resilient.
Exactly. In fact, it's usually those imperfections, those times when we mess up, that teach us the most and help us grow.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Fall Down 7 Times, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners are walking away with today?
Well, for me, it's remembering that resilience isn't something you're just born with. It's not like some people have it and others don't. It's more like it's something you practice. It's a choice you make every time things get tough. It's about embracing those mistakes, learning from them, and finding the courage to keep going, even when you don't really feel like it.
I love that. It's so easy to forget, especially when you look around and it seems like everyone else is finding success so easily. But the truth is, real growth takes time and effort. And yeah, probably a few stumbles along the way.
Right, exactly. And whether we're talking about, literally learning how to ride a horse or just figuring out life in general, it takes patience and perseverance. And you know what else helps? A good sense of humor.
That never hurts. Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into Fall Down 7 times. It might be a short chapter, but as we've seen, there's a lot to unpack there.
It just goes to show, you can find these little nuggets of wisdom in the unexpected places. You just have to be open to it.
So true. And until next time, remember Manjiro's story, right? Embrace the unknown, don't be afraid to make mistakes, and never, ever give up. Who knows what amazing things you might accomplish if you just keep getting back up.